Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming out on a Wednesday afternoon at the end of Summit. And this is a pretty good turnout. So today we're going to talk about change control and HealthShare. A quick intro about us. I'm Keshav Iyer. I'm a developer on the HealthShare team. And
I'm Tim Leavitt, Development Manager in Application Services.
Yeah, so I'll let Tim take it over.
So we'll start out just talking about what we mean by change control and what the flow of change control looks like in the way we do things. We'll talk about the HealthShare deployment model and our work that we're doing toward enabling change control in HealthShare. Our plans for our initial rollout of this in some smaller areas where we're planning to go, and I'll give a little demo of what this looks like, not in HealthShare, but in an application my team owns that we've been using as a test bed for the technology and the same user interface tooling that we'll have in HealthShare. So what is change control anyway? You may not have heard this term before, and why does it matter? The goal of change control is to establish standard procedures for managing change requests in an agile and efficient manner in an effort to drastically minimize the risk and impact a change can have on business operations. In ITIL, which is like Information Technology Infrastructure Library, the common framework for IT management, this is referred to as change management, which also means something in a different context that people get confused about and think we're talking about that. So when we say change control, we mean change management from an ITIL perspective. Drilling into that a little bit more. It's a process for a change to a system or environment. What do we mean by a change? This is the addition, modification, or removal of anything that could affect IT services. By control, we mean that we're tracking this change in some manner, often using a source code management system. So an uncontrolled change would be something like someone goes into production and tweaks something and then leaves for Global Summit, and while they're gone, everything goes crazy and nobody knows what happened or why. By a system or environment, we mean the location where the application is running, which involves a bunch of pieces. There's the operating system, virtual machine, container, etc. The running application for our customers on an Iris instance. And there may be other associated components, web servers, that kind of thing as well. Why do we need this? Because our requirements keep changing. Even after we go live, we're going to continue to need changes to our production environments. And these requirements and solutions are really complex. So it's not like one person can just know everything in their head, and if someone else takes over, what's even happened here? How do you know? Within InterSystems, in our hosted solutions and managed services, we cover full service, meaning making implementation, customization changes, not just the software itself. And if we're going to meet SLAs, or in some cases, if you're going to meet SLAs, you need to know what's going on in these systems. When you have a change control process in place, you're forced to evaluate upfront what is the risk involved in making a change. What could go wrong such that if someone's looking back at things that have happened recently, they can see, oh, this could be what led to this. When we have a record of the changes that are made, the activities taken related to those changes, reviews, code reviews, we would use the term peer reviews, approvals by management or others for the change to proceed, we get three key things. Discoverability. If something goes wrong, we can figure out what went wrong. Repeatability, because we document the process of making a change. If you start doing something, you get it done in the base or the development and test environment, and then you go off to Global Summit. Someone else can pick it up, and they know the steps to make the same change in production if it needs to happen while you're away. And there's revertibility. So when something goes wrong, because we have documentation of what's changed and why, and ideally some representation of what's changed that can just be rolled back, we're able to get it out of the environment where it's causing issues and maybe just say that was completely wrong, or maybe re-implement it correctly. It's important for compliance, and ultimately having these processes improves the quality of the software and solution and user satisfaction because things aren't randomly breaking. And with that, even a small change within critical functionality can bring a system to its knees. With change control, as I said, you evaluate the risk up front, so you really proactively take those steps to identify what could go wrong because of this and to mitigate those risks in the process. And because the change is tracked, it's easy to revert. So what does this look like in play in real systems? And hopefully this at least resembles what you might have in some manual processes right now. So generally, the way we do things, the following environments typically exist for some given system. Base, or we might say dev. This is where the work initially happens when you're building things out. Test, and live or production. And it's useful to have these three environments because you need to do the work somewhere rather than just production, and it's helpful to have a place to practice the process of applying the change before you get to production to work out any issues with the process. So change control enables tracking and promotion of changes between these environments. In base, this is, as I said, where changes originate and experimentation and development can occur. When change control is enforced, changes can be made only when the user has an active change session, and you'll see that in action a little bit in the demo. Otherwise, no changes can be made, and all of the changes that are made within the application are tracked, so you can see, what have I changed? What's happened as I've been doing things in the user interface? And from there, you can commit them to your source control tool of choice. In test, you can run tests with a better representative environment often of the live production system. We lock down the system so that no changes can be made directly, and the only way things get there is they're first made in base and reviewed. There's not manual intervention there. Live, of course, this is the production environment. Of course it's locked down, and changes need to come from a lower level environment. In practice, sometimes we just have, in rollout, we just have base and test or base and live, but this is where things end up going. You might have heard us talk before about change control record, or CCR. This is InterSystems application for managing change control that we've been using very successfully for 14 years for our TrackCare implementations around the world, and that my team uses for managing changes to our internal applications. It's built to really easily integrate with Iris so that you can deploy code with just the click of a button. And it tracks all the customizations that we're making in products, TrackCare and HealthShare implementations where we're involved around the world. It manages the versioning and flow of custom code and configuration changes. Those changes are made in the customer's environment, and CCR manages the transport from the customer's environment to InterSystems Perforce server, where we do our source code management, and then also back out to the test and production environments. As I said, you can adapt it to meet the specific needs and phase of the project you're working on. A quick note on who can use this, and this is just official policy. Organizations can be approved to use our change control record CCR application if they're hosted by InterSystems, they're using an InterSystems managed service, InterSystems is the prime contractor for their on-site solution implementation, or there are some really special cases outside of that where we may consider a customer to be highly strategic such that we would want to open this up. I'll hand it over to Keshav now to move to HealthShare specifically.
All right, thanks, Tim. So now that all of you are experts on change control, let's talk about what we're going to do with HealthShare. So to understand how change control will be beneficial in HealthShare, we first need to see what does a HealthShare deployment model look like. What's a typical deployment in HealthShare? I'm sure that across everyone in this room, everyone deploys HealthShare differently. So we don't have a typical deployment because the HealthShare suite of products are quite diverse, highly customizable, plenty of options. I'll talk briefly about a single instance versus federated deployment, which is the two main categories. But although we don't have a typical deployment model, we can have a standard process for making changes to our deployments. So what does a single instance federation look like? It's where you have all your namespaces on a single instance. So this could be a registry, or edge gateways, access gateways, and so on, along with through system index, health insight. You can also have a federated deployment where you have everything on different machines or web servers. So that's a common case when you have much larger systems, helps you scale more horizontally instead of vertically on a single instance. So what are the types of configuration you can have? Of course, you have your operating system level type stuff, but from a HealthShare application perspective, you have the web gateway and the web server configuration. You have all of your custom code that you may write, your interoperability productions, as well as any additional configuration changes in HealthShare tables. Go next. All right, so now that you know what HealthShare looks like, I'm sure you didn't know that coming in here, we can talk about change control in HealthShare and how does it work exactly. Yeah, it does. All right, so what already exists? We already do have change control in HealthShare, and Tim mentioned that briefly, that CCR is already used for HealthShare deployments. So CCR, we speak of three sort of tiers. Tier 0 is where you manually document the changes you're making. And so for a lot of HealthShare configuration, that's currently what we have. Tier 1 is really just source control of your code. So you write custom code, your like say custom SDA extensions, anything in the HS custom database, all that would be under Tier 1. Interoperability productions, they can be exported to as classes, so that again falls under Tier 1. Tier 2 is the actual configuration tables. So these are tables like in SQL. You may wonder, okay, what's a good way to export these? So with Tier 2, we automatically export these to the file system and store these in source control. And that will be the focus of upcoming work in HealthShare. Yeah. So what are we adding change control to? Configuration settings. Now, you may ask, what are configuration settings? These are things in your, like, say, registries or any persistent tables that dictate the functioning of your application. So since HealthShare is very customizable, you may have many different settings that actually control how you want things to function. So you have the registry, you have your service registry, facility registry. Yeah, if you use a clinical viewer, you have your layout files, your navigation application, and so on. So right now, a lot of this is Tier 0, where people will have to manually make the changes, document it, and then make it again in higher level environments, which is very prone to human error, especially some of these settings are very sensitive, so a typo can cause vastly different results. So what are we going to be doing if the clicker works? All right, so what does change control look like in HealthShare? There's two options that we'll be supporting. There's having it be per namespace or also instance-wide. So per namespace, each namespace in HealthShare is treated as its own system in change control or CCR. And so then when you need to make changes, it's easy to configure first up, but it's high overhead if you have, say, 20 or plus namespace on the same instance, then you have to do the same configuration 20 times. With instance-wide, you configure it once in HS Custom, and then it works for all namespaces on the instance. It has a bit more overhead to set up, but once it's set up, it functions pretty smoothly. All right, how would change control help? So as we said, there's a lot of like registries and configuration tables in HealthShare. It's in particular very helpful for highly UI-driven activities. So things like your consent registry, or say customizing the look and feel of certain pieces of your UI in the navigation application or the universal login. So trying to manually make those changes in higher level environments is pretty cumbersome and error prone. So with this, you can still use the UI for making changes in your base environment, and then just have it automatically exported and promoted with a push of a button to higher level environments. Next again. All right. Yeah, so open question to everyone. Towards the end, we would like to hear what parts of the product you would like to most see change control in. I'll talk about our initial plans, but if, say, there's a lot of demand for other parts, we're happy to change. We're really looking for your feedback here. All right, so initial support. What we have targeted for the fall release of HealthShare, so 24.2, is we're going to focus on the registry namespace because that does have the most amount of configuration and metadata. We're going to start with the security settings. We've received a lot of feedback that the universal login application, where you get to customize the look and feel. The UI is great, but then we have to manually go and make those same changes in higher level environments, which is quite cumbersome. And we'll also be doing security domains. And the future plans, well, hopefully every part of HealthShare that has any configuration can be automated with change control. That is a long-term goal, and we'll take small steps to get there. So what that looks like is there's many things in the registry namespace. Most tables that have the term registry are some sort of configuration that you would want change controlled, along with the navigation application settings, which also live on the registry. Beyond the registry, though, we do have other parts of the product that have configuration. So there's a clinical viewer, the layout files, there's the patient banner and patient search configuration, the reports, which is a relatively new feature that was spoken about at other sessions. Personal and community has the workbench, then this provider directory has its own code tables, and even unified care record has its own version of code tables. So, time to pass it back off to Tim for a demo.
All right. So to provide a bit of context again, I'm the development manager in application services. My team maintains a large number of different internal applications we use within InterSystems, all of which are Iris-based. And we have one of them that we've been using as a test bed for these concepts. So this is an application that keeps track of the whole list of things that track care can do, and a bunch of metadata around that that's useful for a lot of reasons that aren't really relevant to our presentation, so I'm not going to go into that. So this is the base environment, as you can see from the label up here, and it looks a little different from our test environment. In base, there's the option to edit and delete things and to create new things, although it's currently disabled for some reason, and in test, those options do not exist. I can see that the first line here looks a little bit different between base and test, and that's because I've already made a change. So if I want to start making a change, well, the first thing I need to do is go over to my change session management. So I need to enter a new session key or select an existing one. And this serves to group all of the work that I'm doing in the user interface together. So if I'm working on 5 projects at the same time, I can do things in one context and then get interrupted, shift over to another context, do my stuff there, get it in, go back to the other thing. I find myself doing that all the time at more of a code level. So before I do that, I need to go into CCR, which you can see here, and create a CCR, a change control record. And I don't just go in and start making changes. I need to do a little bit of documentation up front, which is to say, this is what I'm changing. So there's a title and description, and I need to, before I start making any changes, prepare to make the change by saying, what am I going to change? I'm going to change the function definition for access invoices. And what could break because of that? What are the impacted areas from this change? Which in this case is relatively minor. I'm not going to drastically alter the behavior of the application. And then in base, there is an implementation plan, which is basically just hit a button, and you'll see that in action in a minute. There's a backout plan to say, how do I get the change out of the environment? There's a testing plan, and I also document in each phase what are the testing steps that were actually taken for this change. So my change session key will be my CCR record ID. I'll go ahead and apply that. And now I can actually make changes to the application. So I'll go back to that functions page. I can create new things now, I can delete things, and I can edit this to just say, add a period here. Lots of billing systems are supported. I don't know. I don't actually know much of anything about TrackCare, but we're just making some things up here. So now I can go over to change management, and I can see that I have made a change within this change session. I can take a look at it and see this is the difference between the old version and the new version. And if I realize right there I got something wrong, I can just revert it. And the data, the configuration data within the application will go back to what it was. I'll step back and note, this is a very simple example. It's just changing some text. But you can imagine spending half an hour, 45 minutes, something like that, in the consent registry, configuring some really complicated rules, making sure everything works, and then going back, writing all of that down, and needing to do it in another environment, and you're going to get something wrong. Because this captures all of the changes as you're making them, they're associated to the reason why you're making them, and it's really easy to see through these diffs what's changed. It's a lot safer to continue making these changes, and you can trust that you've actually changed the right things. So once I think I've made the right changes, I'll go ahead, oh, not actually that, I'll generate an access token in CCR, copy that off. I'm gonna select this and say commit the change. I'll paste in that access token. I'll get a little bit of helpful information here, pointing to CCR saying this is what's going on. This is the change you're associating it to. I'll make sure, yes, that's actually what I meant to put it on, and say commit. And this closes out my change session by default, so I need to create a new one if I'm going to continue making changes. Over in CCR, I can see that there are now 2 submitted changes. There's the first change that I made there, and then I just tweaked the description a little bit further. There's this global unique identifier that identifies the specific record that I'm operating on, because the row ID is likely to be different between environments. And the next step would be to test it, as I have, and to mark base complete, which will send it for peer review, so that somebody else needs to look at my change and make sure that I actually did the right thing. I have superpowers in CCR, so I'm going to bypass that for the sake of the demo. Not something you should do in real life. But a peer reviewer might bypass reviews might review and then say, I don't need to look at this again, it's just good to go. So when I mark base complete, normally would go for peer review. I've noted the testing plan, which was planned out in advance, the testing steps taken, has this URL in it, and we have some neat things that'll automatically expand this env tag to base test live. And I can mark base complete. So how does this change go to test? I'm not able to manually make it there, but this is going to do an integration and source control under the hood. I don't need to worry about Perforce, which we use at all. I'm not interacting with it directly. And I can see, well, not yet. It did a preview to make sure it was actually, there weren't going to be any conflicts with other ongoing work. Nothing was flagged. So I'll authorize and start move to test. And this will do the actual integration of changes from the base branch to the test branch, which is pretty quick. And this will give me what's called an item set. That's just a bundle of all of those changes that I made for the appropriate branch. So I can just click this deploy to test button, log in here, and now if I go back to the test environment, you can see it's got an old description here. Now it's got the new one. And moving even a very complicated change from base to test is just that easy. You hit a button, your changes are there. Of course, this is not a change that was sanctioned. I shouldn't have actually made it. If someone who owns this application saw that I changed that, they would say, no, this is wrong. You've got to get it out of there, which is true because TrackCare, maybe it's covered under another function. I don't really know what TrackCare does. It does so many things I can't keep track. That's why we need a whole application to do that for us. So what I can do, I can see this is now in test. And I just know this is wrong. I shouldn't have done it in the first place. So I'm going to cancel the CCR. And this means that the changes need to be removed from the force branches and corresponding environments, because we don't want to just leave a crashed car on the speedway that all of the other changes after it are going to run into and cause issues. So this will undo all of the changes in source control and get them out of their respective branches, and it'll give me new item sets that I can deploy to the base and test environments, which I'll do. And test. Same procedure. And now it's back to the old version. And base is back to the old version. So getting a bad change out is also that easy. All right, so that's our demo. At this point, we'll move back to any questions you might have. We would love to hear your experiences working with HealthShare implementation and the things that you've run into. If you have horror stories that you feel comfortable sharing, if you have things that you feel would really make your life easier, we want to hear about that early in the process as we're early down this road enabling change control for HealthShare.
Will this just be for HealthShare or will it work for HealthShare?
Yeah, so just to repeat the question for the recording, whether this will be in just like HealthShare Unified Care Record or also Health Connect. For the short term, it's going to be just in Unified Care Record, but there's a lot of shared code between the products, so we'll definitely get it onto Health Connect. So like some of the registries, for example, the facility, service registry, config registry, those are shared. So we'll get those into Health Connect as well. Yeah.
How do you do like conflict resolution? Is there anything you do on?
I'll hand that over to Tim. Questions whether there's dealing with conflict resolution.
So one thing that CCR is backed by Perforce. If you're used to using Git, for example, the natural flow of things is code is just copied. Perforce does a much better job with automatic resolution of differences between branches, and it's very rare for us to actually see conflicts. If you're using CCR, then someone from a technical specialist role in InterSystems could need to get involved to untangle conflicts, but that actually happens very rarely because Perforce supports cherry picking changes between branches in a way that Git normally does not.
Okay, follow-on question. We have some different settings between different endpoint domains and things between different environments. How would that be?
Yeah, great question. So the question was regarding different values that are different in different environments. So often this is the case with a lot of network information. There is ways in which we'll exclude certain pieces of information between environments. So when promoting, we don't accidentally promote, like say the network details from base to test. So those can persist in those specific environments and not get promoted everywhere. Okay. Yep.
So we know that parts of the URL, most of it will be the same, but not the host name.
Yep.
And maybe not some security settings.
Yeah, that's a good question. So for the service registry in particular, for people who are unaware of it, it basically has details of endpoints that you may need access to. Some of these, this has a pretty big mix of the types of endpoints. So as Francois said, you may have like URLs to external systems, but it also has a lot of URLs used by HealthShare that we generate sort of when you activate your namespace so that the instances can talk to each other. So those auto-generated ones we would not want to promote between environments because we'll regenerate them for each environment anyway. But things like to test systems, external systems, we'll definitely have a flag to say, hey, I do want to promote these records to high-level environments. I don't want to promote the other ones. So parts of it, yeah. Also, like ways to promote only certain fields within the table, so not promote all the fields. Yeah. Yeah.
So how is this going to be implemented? Is this be a part of the product itself and we can choose it?
Yeah, so the question is how will this be implemented? It will be part of the product itself. To actually configure the system for change control, you run like one terminal command along with the details of, okay, what kind of environment this is, where should these files be exported to on the file system, and so on. If you don't enable the system for change control, it will function exactly as it has. But when you do, then you can have that good user experience of having things locked down, and you have to start a change session to actually make changes. So it gives you that additional layer of control. Yeah.
What about any kind of promotion of code or configuration that requires follow-up steps, like restarting a production or building an index or something like that?
Yeah, great question. So questions about follow-up steps after, say, a change is imported into a higher-level environment.
I'm happy to answer that.
Tim can
so
answer that one.
from a CCR perspective, there are a couple approaches that can be used for that. Within CCR, you have an implementation plan, which is normally just hit a button. If there's something else you need to do manually as part of a change, it would be documented there, along with the steps to undo it. It's also possible to configure what's called a CCR event handler to say, for example, after an item set is loaded, if it has this kind of thing in it, then do this. And you can automate that in ObjectScript. And one other thing, you can have a per CCR routine named implement CCR that record ID, and that will run automatically if there's just a really simple one-time thing that you want to script. So there are a couple different options depending on the specific task.
Could this be used as well, like to propagate changes across systems, like 28 gateways, and I want to make a change on all of them? Or is each one in its own case?
So the question was regarding propagating changes, not just within one environment, so say for an edge gateway between base test and live, but say between many edges that are all, say, in the base environment.
So if you have namespace-specific change control, all right, restating the question, how does this handle if you have like 20 edge gateways? If you have instance-wide change control, then everything is deployed to HS custom. And if you have multiple instances in the federation, you would have those as secondary environments in CCR, and you would require deployment to all of them to HS custom. In the case of namespace-specific change control, then each edge gateway is its own system, which if you have 200 edge gateways is crazy, which is why we would advise instance-wide change control in that case. For the recording, if you have 20 instances, not just 20 namespaces, but 20 completely separate instances, there is a link in CCR, deploy to all, that will open 20 tabs that you just log in, log in, it goes, and it's a little bit of work, but less than applying it manually everywhere.
Is there any way you can add single authentication to that? If we have multiple edges and you have to authenticate for each individual instance?
The question is whether you can have like single sign-on across all of them.
We should talk about that.
We should talk about that, yeah. Great question.
Thank you.
But yes, we can probably do that because we do support single sign-on across the HealthShare environment. They would just have to do it for this one additional application. Yeah, definitely.
I actually have a question. I'm just curious by show of hands, how many people here are running HealthShare that are self-hosting and have no InterSystems involved in terms of implementation or et cetera? I'm just curious, just to show of hands. Okay. And do you guys have source control, change control that you're happy with from service, that's something that you're discussing, I'll bring that back to the data point. It's something that you're interested in, talk to your account manager and have them run that change.
Another show of hands, I'm just curious, who's currently using CCR with HealthShare?
Yeah, great. Thank you, everyone.